I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek with this because it is, frankly, you're making a knife out of shit. It is somewhat disgusting. Um, and you would think the conclusion would be obvious with this, but hey, you tested it anyway. Alrighty, apologies for a later video than normal this week. Been having some technical difficulties behind the scenes, but back in order, at least for now. I think we worked out the bugs in the system. Anyway, a while back, I did a little series on the guiding principles of scientific inquiry, which is how you go about doing science, not just the scientific method per se, but some of the other kind of nuanced things that come in alongside of the normative principles of scientific research and all that. So the first of these is actually what I want to talk about today in what is a silly but a good discussion, I think, involved with these principles. The first key principle here, it's somewhat interrelated, not necessarily ordered, is posing a significant question that can be investigated empirically, meaning what? With evidence, with observations, with analysis, with data. All of those kinds of things. And so, with that in mind, sometimes we see research that is, shall we say, you're asking they did what? Or why did they study that? Or why the heck is that mattering? Why the heck is that significant? Significant doesn't necessarily mean that it has to have any significance to society writ large, as much as it has significance to the field of study in question. And that brings me to the actual topic article for this video. Something which Gina, my co-host on Rogue Journal Club, which we will be filming another episode of that next week, so you will get you'll get your first Rogue Journal Club of 2023 here soon, I promise. Sent me this one, and I figured this would be a humorous way to end a week. In the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports, here, and this is an open access article, so you're welcome to dig in. Go have a look, although if you're following along this far, you've probably already read the title on the screen here. Experimental replication shows knives manufactured from frozen human feces do not work. Let me say that again. Experimental replication shows knives manufactured from frozen human feces do not work. This is a legitimate article. This is a published, peer-reviewed article in this particular journal. It's an archaeological science journal, as you can guess from what's on the screen and what I just said. So this is one of those where you're asking, what? Why? What the heck? The highlights kind of tell the tale, and we'll go a little bit further into the article. I will admit this is one where I'm just like, I would think that would have been obvious. So why did they do this? And here's actually why. A lot of these articles nowadays, you'll see the highlights right up front. So you can get into the highlights here of what they talk about in the article and what the conclusions were and all that kind of stuff, not just from the abstract. An ethnographic account states an Inuit man made a knife from his own frozen feces. We experimentally tested knives manufactured from frozen human feces. Knives manufactured from frozen human feces do not work. I really hope this is a gag article sometimes. Really, really hope this is a gag article, to be honest, although it doesn't seem to be. The ethnographic account of an Inuit man manufactured, this is from the abstract, by the way, manufacturing a knife from his own frozen feces to butcher and disarticulate a dog has permeated both the academic literature and popular culture. To evaluate the validity of this claim, we tested the basis of that account via experimental archaeology. Our experiments assessed the functionality of knives made from human feces in controlled conditions that provided optimal conditions for success. However, they were not functional. While much research has shown foragers to be technologically resourceful, innovative, and savvy, we suggest that this ethnographic account should no longer be used to support that narrative. which is to say they were... I can't believe I'm about to say this. It's to say they tested whether or not you can make a knife from your own shit. Forgive me, but of all the things I thought I would never say, that is probably one of them. Here's a little bit out of the introduction so you can understand where this ethnographic account came from. In his book, Shadows in the Sun, Davis recounts what is now arguably the most popular ethnographic account of all time. One of the most popular ethnographic accounts of all times. Quote, there is a well-known account of an old Inuit man who refused to move into a settlement. Over the objections of his family, he made plans to stay on the ice. To stop him, they took away all of his tools. So in the midst of a winter gale, he stepped out of their igloo, defecated, and honed the feces into a frozen blade, which he sharpened with a spray of saliva. With the knife, he killed a dog. Using its rib cage as a sled, its hide to harness another dog, he disappeared into the darkness. Now, it's as you can see from here, it's been, publication, stories been told and retold in documentaries and websites, message boards, the whole works. And the author himself, who wrote that up, did think that initially he thought the Inuit telling him the story was pulling his leg, giving him a joke. Yet, as the support for the credibility of the story, Davis cites the autobiographical account of Peter Freuchen. I'm probably not doing the name correctly. The Danish Arctic explorer. Freuchen describes how he dug himself a pit to sleep in and woke up trapped by snow. Every effort to get out that he tried failed. Finally, he recalled seeing dog's excrement frozen solid as a rock. So Freuchen defecated in his hand, shaped it into a chisel, and waited for it to freeze solid. He then used the implement to free himself from the snow. I moved my bowels, quote, I moved my bowels from the excrement I managed to fashion a chisel-like instrument, which I left to freeze. At last I decided to try my chisel, and it worked. Okay. So there is some credence for testing this. In other words, is what the authors are saying. Because, there's stories about it happening. Accounts as, 1950s in here is when this particular account comes from. While tools manufactured from human feces are not unprecedented in the human technological record, we do not believe that Freuchen's account can serve to support the Inuit account for two reasons. First, while we do not have any reason to suspect that Freuchen was prevaricating, to our knowledge, there is no verifiable evidence beyond Freuchen himself that the event occurred, which is meaning to say nobody else. Only the guy who wrote about it himself said that it happened. You have no other way of proving it. Second, a chisel is a very different tool than a knife. Very true. A chisel and a knife are two very different things tool-wise. The mechanics of use are distinct, and the worked substrates in the Inuit and Freuchen cases are different. The Inuit case features a cutting and slicing motion on tissue, muscle, and tendon, and the Freuchen case presents the pounding and chipping of snow. Two very different things, two very different textures that you're dealing with. Given the current ambiguity surrounding Davis' 1998 account in the book of an Inuit using his own frozen feces as a knife, we conducted an experiment to test whether such a knife can function. Rather than conduct an actualistic butchery experiment, we designed a more controlled test that involved simple slicing of materials necessary to skin and disarticulate a dog, hide, muscle, and tendons. We reasoned that if knives manufactured from human feces cannot cut hide, muscle, and tendons in a simple controlled setting, then the notion that such knives could be used to butcher an entire animal would also not be supported. However, if such knives could cut through these materials, then future tests could systematically increase the complexity of experiments for additional support. Which is the idea is to say, start with the best case possible scenario for this as an idea, as an experiment, and then see. Now, admittedly, you don't know the full length of the story. Could something have happened and could something to this effect have happened and just not been translated to modern day in its fullest detail of how exactly the person went about it? Yes, it's possible. But we got to go with the information we have. So that's basically what they went around doing is they one of the authors went on a diet of high proteins and fatty acids considered consistent with someone who lives in the Arctic. Um, so went for different fruits and veggies and what have you. Basically tried to mimic as much as possible a diet from that of the person from that period, and then started collecting samples. I can't believe I'm even saying this. Fecal samples were formed into knives using ceramic molds, knife molds, or molded by hand, hand-shaped knives. All fecal samples were stored at minus 20 degrees Celsius until the experiments began. Procured pig hide, muscle and tendons, and these were stored at minus 20 until 2 days before the experiment began, at which point they were allowed to begin thawing at 4 degrees Celsius. Minutes prior to the experiment, both the knife mold samples and the hand-shaped knives were removed from the laboratory freezer and sharpened with a metal file. You notice this is actually different from the account in Davis's log, where he sharpened it with the spray of saliva. The knives were then buried for several minutes in minus 50 degrees Celsius dry ice to ensure they were sufficiently frozen before any attempt at slicing. The study was approved by the Institutional Biosafety Committee at Kent State University. So, there's your basic thing. He was making a knife out of his own shit to test whether or not you could have actually done this. And, that's... It's a story. It's an account that happens. It's been put out a few different places, as they say, but the point is, could you really do it? Is what they were trying to test. And while not a significant question, necessarily, in any manner of things with society, because I don't think society really needed to know this, and I would think most of us today, because there's probably somebody out there who might say differently, would probably find it pretty disgusting to work with a knife made out of your own feces. Knife made out of your own shit. Could be another, again, a long line of things I never thought I would ever say. This is definitely one of them. Began experiments with the hide, reasoning that if our knives could not cut hide, then subsequent attempts with muscle and tendons would be futile. Neither the knife mold samples nor the hand-shaped knives could cut through the hides, figures S5 to S6. There's a supplemental in this. Despite the hide being cold from refrigeration, instead of slicing through the knife edge simply melted upon contact, leaving streaks of fecal matter. Now, this is the thing, is I could see it maybe if the hide itself was also frozen, but there was a reason it was not, is because the guy said he dismembered, the account says a living dog was killed and dismembered. So you have to presume the animal is warm and above freezing. Hence the reason they did that. Repeated the experiment using fecal samples from another team member whose diet was more traditionally Western. The hand-shaped knives were subject to the same procedure and temperatures as the first set of knives. However, these knives also did not cut through the hide. For curiosity's sake, we tried to cut the subcutaneous fat on the underside of the hide with some difficulty. Only the shallowest of slices could be produced, and the knife edge still quickly melted and deteriorated. So, it's not a significant question in society, but it is a significant question here, because as what they lay out here is that this account has been shared all over the place. And so there's a natural question that, that's interesting. Could you really have done that? And barring something that we don't know from that time, barring something that we don't know how from that time, and that's distinctly possible, this experiment would say no, that you really can't. If there's something else out there that we just don't know and may never know because of how old the account is, that's distinctly possible in here. But while I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek with this, because it is, frankly, you're making a knife out of shit. It is somewhat disgusting. And you would think the conclusion would be obvious with this, but hey, you tested it anyway. It's not a significant question for society. I don't think anybody in society needed to know this. I don't think it answers any relevant question that is going to be earth-shaking. It's still a relevant question for the field of archaeological science, particularly when the ethnographic narrative in question has been so widely used, according to the author's work. And here, they just finish up with some notes on that. Societal narratives and policies are often constructed from anthropological and scientific claims. While the narrative that indigenous and prehistoric people are technologically resourceful and innovative is widely supported, these narratives suffer when an untested claim is used to support it. If an untested claim is used to support a stance, even if that stance is otherwise supported, ethical, or just, then there is no logical reason why a second untested claim cannot be invoked. The use of untested claims has become the norm and can be used to support stances that are beneficial to society, as well as those that are harmful. Anthropologists must actively seek out unsupported claims, assumptions, rumors, and urban legends, and by testing them ensure any narratives that follow are as sturdy as possible. In other words, try and do your best to figure out what the truth is. This is actually why I appreciate the study here at the end. It's just like trying to figure out what the truth is, and so far as they can figure it, you can't make a knife from your own shit. Again, things I thought I would never say. Hope you enjoy this on a Friday. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious, everybody.